record this thing. And I didn't want to hijack the agenda. I just was trying to come up with an idea and I had one, but I'm happy if anyone else has something they want to work through or talk about, I'm open to that for sure.
I don't think I have anything palatable, so.
Yeah, I've been hogging the last few ones. So. Go
Well,
ahead.
that's okay. Okay. Well, we'll see. I mean, I think this feels like an evergreen topic to me, because it keeps coming up. And actually, this came up when I first joined GitLab. One of my first MRs, lucky me, had an N+1 failure. It had several N+1 failures, and I just found the whole process of understanding where it was coming from, how to fix it, to be very confusing. And as it turns out, today I had an N+1 error and it still finds it really confusing. So I guess I haven't matured that much in terms of my N+1 understanding.
I can feel your pain. I have a MR that's been blocked on something similar.
Okay.
First, it was just, it looked fine. And then I found an N+1 issue. And since then it's been in database optimization limbo for a couple for a while.
I know that world. I really do.
Yeah.
I think I live there sometimes. Okay, so let me share. I'll just share. Do you think it's better if I share just Chrome or I share my full screen so the Zoom is like half? Doesn't matter.
Probably the whole screen if you have like your editor and everything as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, it probably will come in handy. Okay.
Yes.
So, and this is a different branch. Let me just quickly check this out. Okay, so, and I like this MR in particular, it's a refactor. Maybe I want to go through with it. I just thought, I also noticed that somebody brought up in the backend pairs channel yesterday another MR with an N+1 issue. And so I was like, ooh, this is a good topic because I find it overwhelming, like you already said, and it's tough. So the issue, first of all, let's look at our documentation on how to resolve an N+1, because that was the first thing that I did today. Oh, that's not like personal. This is like all these conversations. Where are these notes? Here they are. Here's our documentation on how to use Query Recorder to detect an N+1 query problem. And so, and there is some debate about like whether we should do a control query. We can talk about that as well. So it records the number of queries, and you basically say like create a new object and then expect a new load of the page to have the same number of queries as the old one. No N+1. So let me pull up the precise failure so we can look at it together. This guy. It's in a GraphQL test. Why are you not opening for me? There we are. Here we are. I thought I was going to be in the clear here. So in EE, it's a shared example. So it's this fun syntax and it's failing. All three of them are failing. So the control count, let me bump this up a little bit. The control count is 14 and it got 17. Just from a few small changes here. So let me open this up and close this. Not too small. So let's find an instance of this and kind of look at it. Because the first thing that I tried to do was log what is actually, like I was kind of like, well, what is the actual query that's happening, right? And so that's this, finding the source of the query. So you can look at the data attribute. You do debug true.
Yeah, I really like using that.
Okay, great. So I think the shared example is on line 77 here. That's the control count. And so I'm going to add query recorder. True. And
It's query recorder debug, not count.
oh, thank you so much. Query recorder debug, true. And then I also need to run this with query recorder debug equals 1, right? Luckily, I've already done this before, so I have this in my history. So if I run this, oh, I should probably put like a pry in here, right? Because the interesting, oh, it will just logs it to the test.log file. Is there something else you want to like put out from this as well? From this?
No, I usually just go through the log. I'll tail the log and then
okay. And let me
look at the queries from there.
Let me just remove my test log because it already has some stuff in it. Okay, so let's do this. Do you want to tail the log or you want to?
That's what I usually do, yeah.
Okay. Isn't it just like so much stuff?
It is, yes.
Okay. Hold on,
You will get appalled by all the setup code that runs through there every time you run a spec, and then you'll sort of know why it takes so long to start specs.
Yeah.
But I usually am able to see it from the colors in the log, sort of.
Oh, and the color. Okay, that's interesting because before I was just looking at the log file and I found it really hard to read. So maybe tailing it is a better approach. So it's coming out.
My terminal has relatively.
Oh, yeah, this is good. This is better than what I saw before for sure. Same thing. It's always new.
And now it's actually starting.
And now it's actually after the first. Oh, but this is query recorder backtrace.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. I just saw the session flusher, and that's usually when the.
Oh, I think that was the end.
Oh, that's the last one. That's
the last
when there's
one.
like multiple. When there's multiple, then that's where the specs actually start.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what we're looking for, the query recorder backtrace.
And then, so here's something interesting. So I see it here. I see it a few times. I see this block, and then I see this block.
Yeah.
And then I see this block. And then I see this. Like, why are there so many blocks? Is it because of the way the test is written?
I think is it just backtracing every time it runs a query, it's putting the full trace in, right?
Yeah, it gives you the query before it as well, so you can look at the query and then decide.
Oh, okay.
If it's relevant.
This is just one query. I thought each of these query recorder backtrace things was this is a query, this is a query, but now these are all the backtrace for a single query.
Yeah, yeah. That should be that exactly.
Okay. So how does one read this? Like how, because I'll tell you, I can tell you how I did earlier, but I'm curious how you would go about reading this and to say like where is this going on?
I normally have like a slight idea which queries it'll be. So I'll just start looking for one of those callback, those backtrace blocks, and then look at the query and see if that one is the one that applies. And then usually the first few lines of the backtrace will tell me if I'm right or not. So that's usually how I go about them.
I think I've only used this a couple of times in my short time here so far, but I think I pried into the running test when I used it and looked. There's like an object on the query recorder that has all of the queries as strings in it, and I think I just looked at that.
Okay. Yeah, because I did notice that there was a flaky test today related to an N+1, and I noticed that the person debugging it like very cleanly listed all of the queries that were run in order to debug it. I would show it here, but it's on a security change, so maybe I shouldn't
Yeah.
since we post these. But
Probably shouldn't
anyways,
then.
but
Post a link.
yeah, I'll post the link later for sure. I mean, the flaky test itself was not sensitive. It was the related security MR. Anyways, it was actually in the same file, interestingly enough, and they really neatly listed out all of the queries. So maybe they did what Malcolm's talking about. Okay, because just to look at the changes here, where are you? Where are you? Go through 1,000 links to get where I want to go. There we go. The change that I made here is that I moved around some policy stuff. And so this is checking for whether an attribute is set on a project. And I think what happened is because of the way I shuffled things around, that feature is like being checked now when it wasn't previously because of the way policies work, right? Like policies were run in certain orders depending on a variety of factors. And I think because of the way I refactored it, that this is now being checked when it wasn't before. So security and compliance disabled is actually looking for whether the security and compliance attribute is set to disabled on the project. So if I were to go for Sam's approach, I would just look for security and compliance because that's the attribute, but I don't see that coming up. I'm not sure. Okay.
So it's the N+1 check that's in the spec currently. Is it just a count?
It's just a count. Yeah, it's set to 14, and they're basically saying that's how many. And actually, I was trying to look up the Git history of this. It's like, okay, a single query is 14, and so now it's 17 as of this change. So whatever I did in this policy, the number of queries that are now run for a single record is 17. So I could just change this hard-coded query count. But then even when I change that to 17, the multiple query counts are also wrong now because they have 3 more. So that to me indicates that there is an N+1. Although I truly don't understand what 3 times 3 means here. Like the definition of a magic number. Like why? Why not just put 9?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. What does this do better than the word number 9? Yeah.
Yeah, there's also a 3 times 2 somewhere in here. Yeah, here it is. I'm like, okay, so this is 6. I don't know why.
Maybe it's demonstrating that each has 3 and that happens 3 times. Maybe that's why it's written that way, and then just sort of
probably
give the background. That's the only reason I can think of why did you write it like that?
Yeah.
But maybe a comment would have been better in that case than writing it this way.
I did look through the MR where this was added, and there was no comment on this piece of the puzzle, so I couldn't figure it out. But you're right; it probably could be improved, and that would just be helpful to everybody.
Could the reason that the project policy is different now is previously it was ended with can developer access, and maybe that was already keeping it from stopping from checking it.
I think that's probably right. I put a before and after in the MR description here, and you'll notice that this is before, and for this endpoint, by the way, the policy that is checked is read vulnerability. So you only need to worry about read vulnerability right now. So read vulnerability is checked. So before we were like, can you both read security resource and a security compliance disabled? It may very well be in this test file. Yeah, is this user even a member of the project? Oh, add developer. Okay, so they are being added as developers, so they should be able to see things here, I think. And so, and then the next rule is, but here, sorry, I'm like talking over myself. This is where declarative policy is strange. So the way the declarative policy works is that at least one enable call has to be made for the permission to be enabled and no prevents, right? So if there's a prevent anywhere in the stack, declarative policy is going to go through and look at each of those prevents until it hits one, because it needs to know, like, because at least one, but if it's all enables in that list as it is here, it only needs to check the first one. And if it is a go, if it says thumbs up, that it can actually not, it can avoid this.
Yeah.
And by the way, it doesn't always run in this order. Like this is not necessarily the order of evaluation. It's just the list of things that can be checked. So in the after, we now have 3, and one of them is prevent. So prevent will always be checked, not necessarily first, but potentially. And then once it's gone through that, then it might check one of these other ones. But I don't know why that would make 3 more queries.
Does the other count fail in the same file? You had the magic number of 6 on the other one.
That one, yeah. So if I change all instances of 14 to 17, and then and then I run this again. Let's not worry about debugging right now, because we're just trying to see it fail. It will also fail. And so maybe Malcolm, maybe next we should test out the putting a pry in and playing around with it. To do that, do you need to have debug set on?
Not that I recall. I think I can't remember, but I think that control object there, it has an ATA reader for something that's just like a array of all of the queries that were run, or that a hash object or something.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah,
really remember.
so this is fun. It got 29 queries. So it got 3 more than 17 plus 9, which is, or so, yeah. So it got 29.
So I think like I'm biting my lip here because I don't want to start a whole meta conversation about this, but like
Please do.
the system doesn't feel great. Like that in terms of what we have in place here to protect us against N+1s, I feel like if we get an error like this, we want to be able to immediately see what the problem is. Like, you know, in more like an aspect diff kind of expected this, got this, you know.
Yeah.
And I've seen the query recorder implemented in a few places in a different way, where people are like looking for one of this query and one of this query and one of this query.
Oh, okay.
And then when that fails, you know, you see, oh, I expected one call to select staff from projects and I got 2. And that's like a lot more easy to understand. So I think in the case of this example, it's just really hard to, how are we going to work out what's changed?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. I agree. I mean, and this is the issue I've had in the past too, right? You just, it kind of relies on you having a deep understanding of what's happening in the code that you're touching, as opposed to like guiding you to a solution. It's just kind of like, nope, here's 800 lines of SQL. Enjoy. So
That's why database is my kryptonite.
yes.
Not general use, but these specifics always drive me mad. Yeah.
Totally. So One thing I find interesting, by the way, is just like, what's this about? Why are these all the same query? Like, do we have a problem that's bigger than an N+1 here? Because why are we running this exact same query so many times?
That's a good question.
Is it the exact same one? Just trying to. I don't see a diff. No.
No, it's not. And how many times? So the word select, so these are, like, I was like, oh, is this just like an output issue? The word select occurs 29 times in this output. So these identical queries are showing up as part of the expected outcome. So part of me is like, could we remove
What's
20
in project
queries?
team RB at line 3193? Like, what is it doing?
Let's see. Was it 139?
I think so, yeah.
I think so.
Okay. So this is calling import. I don't know what calls import.
Oh, it does it. It's mapping over all the members. That's why it keeps repeating that query, probably.
Wouldn't it be for a different member each time? User ID is 778 in all of these.
Source members. What?
Is it importer access level is cached and the other one is not? New member access level. Why is that? Is the on line 127 we cache max? It looks like we cache it there.
Yeah,
Like I would expect on 139, I would expect new member access level to be a different ID every time. Why is it not? Like I don't think it would be weird if the query would come from the cache value, right?
And what you think it's caching on line 127 because of this method?
Well, like by cache, I mean
Just
we're
saving
storing
it.
Yeah, we're saving it there so we don't rerun it every time. But like, why is it always the same ID for new member access level then? I'm guessing that's what's creating the query. I mean, we can comment that out and just remove that new member access level, and then something else might break, but maybe we'll see less queries on 139. Like,
Okay, so let's just do this and see how many queries we have out of curiosity.
yeah, that's what I'm going with right now.
I love it.
It's still strange that it's the same ID every time.
It
I'm
really
confused by that.
It's really confusing. And somebody, by the way, part of the change in order to fix the flaky test today was this number we just took from 14 to 17. Someone else took it to 15. So it's like there's something happening in this file. Oh, it's still massive.
Still doing that. Okay.
Still doing
I
this.
think that's probably another indication that the process isn't really fit for purpose as well. If there's people like the way you're solving your N+1s is by just changing the number of expected queries every time.
Totally.
Technically
Yeah.
I can be
Especially-
as rude as I want about this because this is my team, this file. So, if I
I'm
start
so
ripping into
glad.
it, then it's because it's family.
Okay, good. Well, maybe that means you also will know the solution. So that
No.
didn't fix our issue, but this is 193.
It
This is
changed the line.
193. Oh, really?
I think so.
Okay, I cleared
Unless
I
my
always
brain has a.
Well, so here's something
Could
that's
be
interesting about our
that I
N+1s.
misremembered.
We're not using request store here. So request store, like this is using safe request loader. So in theory, like our N+1 test could benefit from request store, right? Because that's why the whole point of using safe request loader is to, in the context of a single request, to cache those requests. So even if this is made multiple times for the same user in a request, it should just be cached and not be run again.
Yeah.
So we can try adding that. I already tried this, by the way. I didn't do anything. I'll just do it again for funsies. That should do something, I think. And then we run the test again.
We undo the change we made.
I did undo the change we made. I can go back into it. What line was that on? 138?
139, 38, 39.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Go this
undone.
guy.
Okay.
I undid that. This is not saved yet. Ha!
Well, that shouldn't be a failure.
Ah, we got the old N-7 problem.
Yeah, the N-7 problem. Exactly.
So
that feels.
Yeah. I think that was like part of the problem. I mean, I'm not sure, but I do think, okay, so hold on, by the way, we still have it set to 17. So it's still 17. We still have added 3 requests, but we no longer have, oh no. Oh yeah, because now it should be 10. Oh my gosh. Wait, let me put this back and just make sure this passes because I made that change right as the test was running and I don't know if I saved it. I'm like, my fingers don't coordinate with my brain noise. It would be pretty funny if we were just like slowly bumping this up because we weren't using request store in the context of the test. But yeah, it's actually 10.
Yeah.
Great.
Request loader works.
It works. That's good. Okay, so hold on. What test line am I running again? I'm running one of the 17s. So I change this to 10. It's why can I not read the syntax? I know somebody pointed me to like the documentation for it. I was like, this is so
because
hard.
Shared examples come out of hell and are here to haunt you. That's why.
I don't even know what this is called. Like, this is what the problem was. I was trying to Google it and I was like, what is it called when you have a bracket with a number and these, what is it called? Do we know? We have a word for that.
I don't know.
No. I mean, it's like the first context and then the 7th iteration through the context under that, and then the first context within that, and the first context within that, and the first context within that, I think.
Oh, okay. It's like the nested levels, the nested.
Yeah.
That is not made for humans.
No, not at all. It
Okay,
astounds me every day that the RSpec knows how to run it, to be honest. I'm like, what?
Yeah, seriously. I think I learned relatively recently that you even could run it this way. I thought you just had to run the whole file for a while, when you're doing shared examples.
I just put a focus on whatever spec I'm running.
Yeah.
That's really smart. That's really smart. I should do that. Well, let's see if this is the one. I just picked the first one. I don't know
if that comes out of a CI failure, I'll copy it and run it that way. But otherwise, I'm just putting a focus on whatever I think.
Okay, let's put how do I put a focus on this?
You add an additional argument, symbol focus, and then
This one?
yes, exactly.
Cool. That's new to me. I usually do the opposite. I just comment everything else out.
This is way faster.
Yes. Okay, so So I'm focused on the one that I changed this to 10 because I'm just curious if the multiple queries count issue is still present or if that was also an issue with query recorder. Ah,
Nice.
oh my goodness gracious. So let's see. Wow, we just really helped your team. So happy for us and for you. We'll see. But the
Probably
thing
shaved a
is,
bit of every CI execution from here on out. So
but I have experienced the flaky N+1 test as well, because there are certain queries. This came up in a separate issue that I linked to in our agenda, that there are some queries that run like once in a while. And so there are a lot of ways also to write N+1 tests that pass when there's still an N+1. Great. Wow. That was cool. Nice work, peeps. I hope that was good. So let's go to this issue. So there's an issue of counting cached queries. Oh yes, it's because some queries will only run on the first request and they'll be cached even for subsequent requests. And so if you're comparing request 1 versus request 2, request 1 would always have like more queries, right? Because it's the first
it's like
time.
the control issue, right? Using the control or not.
Is the control, yeah. So there has been some suggestions, I think even in this thread somewhere, that maybe it's good to do 3 queries. You do the first as like the warm up, then you do a control, then you do the test case, which is interesting. And then this mentions about how to avoid doing warm ups. Why don't headers work?
The anchor's broken for you as well.
Anchors are always
of
broken
times.
for me. Always.
Yeah.
In the docs, they don't work. It's really, really, really frustrating. Okay, avoid false positives. Oh, this says use a different user for each request. So that's another tip that I recently became aware of for how to avoid, like if you're using a different user, then you don't need the warm up because they're both like first requests or first, they're gonna both
Makes
do a warm
sense.
up
Yeah.
user. So in this example, there's a control count for this user. They have one CI pipeline, and then this user, I guess they're creating a second CI pipeline, and then this user shouldn't have more queries. So I guess that's an idea. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to look at this data, the do a pry like we were talking about before, even though we kind of think maybe this was a
I
false
think
positive?
it's complicated, I think, because like my temptation here would be to like dump the queries from master in a file somewhere, switch to this feature branch, dump the queries from there, and then diff them. And kind of that's what I feel like in a golden world. It's like we should just have that happen in the spec somehow.
Like
Okay,
a fixture file for all the queries it ran.
Fixture. Oh yeah,
should
like
it like record like a fixture file for all the queries that are involved in that spec? And
I mean, even that, it feels like any change I'm going to go and make somewhere is going to affect that. So it's like, I think it's really hard to test this effectively in a way where side effects that I don't care about are going to impact it. I don't know. Has there been much conversation about this topic, like generally company-wide, that you're aware of? Like, or even alternative approaches, like a strict loading is something that's newish to Rails, which is basically it won't eager load for you.
Oh.
So you can put that on a scope, and then it will bail out if you try and eager load. So that's a very sledgehammer approach, but it's an alternative way to fix these.
And that's called strict loading.
Strict loading, yeah.
Okay. I'm not familiar with strict loading. Nice.
And I think there's some other strategies as well. I saw a talk about it recently, but I can't remember.
Okay. I mean, I've worked on code bases in the past that used Bullet, the Bullet gem.
Yep.
And I saw a closed without merge request where somebody some years ago was trying to add that to the GitLab code base. I can't remember why it wasn't merged.
It's not the best solution in practice. Like, it's a nice idea, but it gives a lot of false positives and also misses a load.
Okay.
I'll try and find a link to the talk that I saw.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, I think in the short term, one thing that would be helpful, I mean, I love the idea of automating it, and I think that's what we need. I also feel like our documentation here, I have made, like, the reason I had that issue handy about query recorder and how to think about this, whether you make 3 requests or you make 2 requests with different users, or should you count cache queries or not, is that I made some updates to these docs after I ran into a big issue with him some months ago. But then I don't know if the changes I made actually were the right changes, or if that's like really, like, I feel like understanding what even is the best way to write an N+1 test so that we're getting accurate answers is like the first thing we need to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think from my point of view, it's stepping back and thinking, like, what would we have loved to have seen in this test output at the beginning of the session today? And how do we get to a point where we see that instead of just expected 10, got 17 or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, I
Right.
guess, because how would it ever do the diff? Like it can't undo the code changes for you. I guess it could do the same query on master or something. But you know what I mean? Like the before after is hard for it to do itself.
Yeah, well, I think that I wish I knew where I've seen it, but I've seen that pattern in certain tests where it's like identifying each type of query and saying how many times it expects to see that one.
Can we use the find query? Like
Yeah, I think that was it.
find query in the code base in the spec, maybe then we'll see one.
Yeah.
Is it find underscore query?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most nowhere.
Okay, so this is doing something. Let's see where it is. Seems like we don't use it a lot. I didn't know this existed. Probably that's why. Oh, interesting.
It must have been something else.
Okay. Well, that's one way to do it that I saw in the docs. That's why I suggested that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Skip cache, that's another thing, like whether to count cache. Skip schema. Occurrences by line method, could that be it?
I can't remember.
Occurrences starting with, maybe?
It could have been that, yeah. No.
Yes. I think I didn't spell it right.
I was going to say kudos for spelling it right on first try.
No, I didn't. I did not. I definitely didn't. Okay.
I thought it was right, which tells a lot about me.
Yeah. Okay, occurrence
Yes,
starting
this is
with.
actually probably the exact file that I saw in.
Okay. So less than or equal to 15. Like, how's that for precision? It's just, and so you like this?
Our current one wouldn't have failed with that queries count to be less than or equal 15, 17 in our case.
Right.
So at least this shows you what you expect, what kind of queries you expect in which count, and then anything else you see, you'll at least have an indication of what's the oddball, I guess.
Yeah, like,
well, do you though? Because it wouldn't output what extra queries. Like if we added select groups from
it
something,
wouldn't. Yeah,
it wouldn't tell you in the output.
it wouldn't tell you that, but you could look at the output of the query recorder and then sort of see what's up.
What's missing?
Or wouldn't it at least in that case tell you if like one of those was being executed more times than you think? It would at least tell you that that specific query showed up more than one or two times in this special.
yeah.
Yes.
Like
yes.
We'd have like insert into notes expected 1 got 4, so you know something's up with insertion in that case. It'll at least tell you when it's one of those. You'll find out about that.
Do you mind if I just poke around here? Like, because I want to see what other methods are available and what they look like in terms of this discussion we're having about what output would actually be the most helpful. Because I think the logging one is pretty overall. And what I did do before, by the way, when I used the logging, I saved the log file, and then like Malcolm said, I went back to master, I ran the test, I saved that log file, and then I like git added one, and then I git added the second one to see what the diff was. But the only problem is that the IDs of the objects were different. So I actually had a huge diff, but it wasn't necessarily because of new queries. It was
need
just
to fix all the IDs all the time. That would help in reproducibility.
Yeah. I actually tried to see if I could get an AI platform to do that for me, but the log file was too big. It wouldn't accept it. But I did try. Okay, so queries.
Computation time is expensive.
Yeah, totally. So queries, what was the method we were looking at? Occurrence.
Occurrences starting with.
I think there's a thing called data that just has everything on it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah.
So that's that's interesting. So there's a count, and that gives the full query and no backtrace, the durations of each one, which is interesting. Okay, so I'm curious why these backtraces are all nil. I'm curious. Duration, we don't really care about. I'm curious why we even have that. Like, is there any scenario in which we would count the duration of a query in the test environment?
It was just interesting for debugging performance issues. That's why it was added somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we could add something. Maybe query recorder, we could add something to it. I don't know what would be helpful. It seems like we could easily add a data attribute that returns something that's a little easier to read. I don't know what that would be though.
I think there's a couple of things. Maybe as most of the time Rails is using prepared statements now, right? So essentially there doesn't have the IDs and the values in the query, it has placeholders. And then the
Mm.
iterations with different IDs would show up as the same prepared statement. So I don't know if it's possible for us to record that.
Ah, very interesting idea.
But also additionally, like even if the query recorder had some sort of differable format output that would be easy to dump, that would help debugging these things. That's kind of an immediately solvable thing, I feel. It's just we make a method on here when you want to do what you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, but is that so easy? Like I feel like I had to switch branches and run the test again. So
It's easier than like totally changing the way we test N+1s
I
across the whole
see.
platform.
I see.
But no, maybe not. Not a 30-minute job, but
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, maybe I will write an issue for that. I feel like the interface of it or the UX of that is a little fuzzy to me, but I definitely see what you're saying in terms of it's easier. I mean, at the very least, we could write down what the manual steps would be, right? Like advise somebody on how they could look at the diff. The ID differences are a problem, so I like the idea of the prepared statement if that's accessible.
yeah,
Or
I
maybe
don't
some
know.
regex or something that would just eliminate IDs. Timestamps too.
I wonder if it
Okay.
still has the same relevance if all the IDs are gone, because maybe if you just eliminate the IDs, you may be thinking it's not an N+1, but actually it is, because the ID would change every time in there.
Oh, but it would still be the number of queries. You would still see the total number of queries. It might just be
Yeah,
harder
you'd
to
see that.
understand why it's
Yeah,
happening.
true.
Okay, so I don't want to do that. I want to save these.
There's something else worth looking at, just I guess for homework, is a gem called prosopite. Don't know
How do
if
you
you've
spell
seen it.
that?
PROSOPITE.
Wow.
And
Is that a
Oh,
mineral?
it's a mineral.
It is.
Oh, here. Okay.
which, yeah,
Wow, quite the claim.
yeah, that is quite the claim. This was a in-person Ruby meetup in town that I saw this talk, and there were quite a number of people in the audience who said, "Yeah, that gem's great." So,
Really?
yeah, certainly like people who didn't like Bullet like this, but I
Okay.
feel like anything like this is probably we're asking too much to just drop it into GitLab. We've got too much of a beast of a application to expect it to just work. But I mean, the approach might be worth looking at.
Yeah, I was
However,
gonna
this gem works.
say, does it proactively like monitor your code or do you invoke it in a test? Do you remember?
I can't remember. I haven't looked at it personally, and it was talked about how it actually works.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
have to
No.
do some more reading.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by their use of leg and chair as examples. Hmm. It's unusual. How it works. Okay. So it looks like it does in fact run. I guess you could run it in a test environment only or something.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. I think
definitely
it
with
works in the same way that when Bullet works well, it's good because it's really genuinely picking up
Mhm.
real issues.
Okay, cool. I'll add
Um,
this to our notes here so we don't forget. Gem. Before we leave this conversation, because we have someone who knows how this test runs, I'm wondering if we could name these magic numbers together. So something equals 3, something else equals 2. What are these? Can we
Yeah,
figure that out together, or is that going to be too much of a task
we'll
for 5
probably
minutes?
have a look, but
I think we could look at the Git diff, but I did do that, and I don't think there was a real explanation, but it could be clear from the history.
so how does it determine the single query and the multiple query count that shared example N+1 queries there? What does that actually do?
The shared example goes in and it does a control where it makes a request, and then it expects the control to equal that single query count, which makes sense. It's just like, this is the number. And then it creates 3
3, which is
vulnerabilities.
I think that's one of our magic numbers.
Okay,
Probably,
great. Okay, so I'm gonna name this create 3 vulnerabilities. And then I'm gonna look for the number 3 down here. Okay, so number of vulnerabilities equals 3. Great. And the question is just, what is the other thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not willing to stand by that being
Is that
exactly
the-
right. That's a guess.
is that
Yeah.
the number 2? Is that the it kind of falls apart when I look at the other example, but I was thinking, like, is it the number of other users on the list, and is it not why it's 2 in that case? But I'm not sure anymore.
Well, this is for remediations. Maybe there are 2 remediations here.
Yeah, that's possible.
So this is with remediation. And then
Yeah,
each of these has a remediation.
the straight transition with remediate.
So then remediations. So 2 would be number of remediations.
Maybe.
But
yeah,
there were 3, weren't there?
There was 1 for each vulnerability, and then there's a remediation on the project itself.
Oh,
Here, or there's a vulnerability. Shoot.
there's one at the top level.
There's one at the top level. I thought it was on the project. I don't really know how remediations work. So there's one at the top levels. There are 4. Okay, so that kind of falls apart. You're right.
yeah, that just fell apart.
Okay. Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Well, we know just naming the vulnerabilities is the first step. The other mystery number, I guess we can let hang out for a bit.
I can maybe dig through who's done most of the work on the spec and try and see if they can remember.
Okay.
there should be a git blame with ranked listing who touched it the most.
Yeah. That's next week's project.
Next week's project. Put it on the list.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, well, this was fun. I'm glad we're all smarter about N+1s a little bit now. Maybe
A
not.
little bit at least, yeah. We've at least had some shared therapy about it.
Exactly. No, it's good. I'm glad you guys find it confusing too, because I'm yeah, like always like, why can't I read all this SQL?
Every time. The worst, a lot of the worst part is once you go in and you kill the N+1s, then you look at your performance on Database Lab, and then it's like, oh no, this is the other side of this. Now, since you've eliminated all the N+1s, now whatever you did to do that is not performing very well. So let's go down let's try 15 indexes route and Yeah.
And I think like we're definitely, there's a big room for improvement, I think, because what we're doing, I think the suspicion with the issue that you're looking at right now is that the authentication code is adding a couple of extra queries, but they're not necessarily N+1. They're just 2 new queries. I mean, maybe they are N+1, but I think it's more likely that they're just one-off queries for the whole request. And yet that's showing up in the
that would already
N+1
trigger
debugging.
the way we test. That's true.
Yeah. And it's like it's kind of a false positive. And yes, it's a new query, but maybe it's not an N+1.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's like we probably should. Well, I don't know. Do we care about the total number of queries? Because ultimately it's about the performance of those queries too. Like Sam was saying, like it could be one really expensive query or 49 cheap queries. We would prefer the cheap, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think we definitely care about N+1s because they're the kind of thing that doesn't show up in tests because you only factory created 2 things. And but like a new single query on each request, I don't think is such a concern. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
the overall request time stays reasonable, right?
Request time. Yeah, but we can't even really evaluate that very effectively in a test environment. I mean, you need it's always about cache.
There's only do it live, and if not, feature flag it at least. Ish live. Yeah. Something that's the hardest part about the database performance. You're always like in this nebulous cloud of you're testing this on a proxy, but you don't know how actual live will handle it. Yeah. There's more performance versus more rows. How is that gonna play out? Yeah.
Totally. Okay. Well, this was fun. Glad to be back.
Yes.
Fun to be here with you all. Guess I'll see you next week.
All right.
Cool.
Yes.
Thanks, folks.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.